Hi, in today's video we're going to take a look at one of the very oldest NuTone 4-note long tube chimes ever made. This particular bass here was probably made sometime between 1936 and 1939, and most likely is from a series of chimes called the Cathedral series or Cathedral models, and this particular one is most likely from the model Trinity 4. And Trinity 4 has a certain type of specific cover that goes along with it, which if this all works out at the end you'll get to see. This is a 4-tube 4-note chime. It's not an 8-note chime like most of us are used to and most of the other videos that I've made are about. This is actually a 4-note chime, and this is one of the rarest chime basses that NuTone ever made because they only made it for about 3 years. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at it. I'm going to show you why it's so different than all the rest and why it's a 4-note chime and not an 8-note chime. So on the front, it's kind of similar to another video I did recently about a vintage chime. The other video, it's the style that actually has a clock motor and the contacts on the front and those things, and it has a transformer inside, and I did sort of an overview after I rebuilt it. This chime is totally different than that. Just looking at it from the outside, it looks very similar, and it looks like a lot of the long tube chimes that NuTone made in the 30s, but what's inside is very different. So if we just look here on the outside, we have the tube hangers here. There are 4 tubes, so you have 4 hangers, and they use these little knurled nuts that you can adjust in and out to space the tubes away from the strikers to get an even sound. This particular one, because of the type of cover it has a light built into it, which goes here in the threaded socket. And then over here we have sort of the classic NuTone, what we would call a volume adjustment. It's a little rheostat, and you can pull the knob and move it up or down to vary the voltage to the solenoids, which makes them strike harder or softer. And then over here on the side, right here, there's actually a pull chain switch, and that controls the light here, so you can turn the light off if you don't want it on. What really makes this different than other NuTone chimes, later chimes, is what's inside. So let's go ahead and open this up and I'll show you what's in it. To open it, you have to take this little screw out right here. The way this installs is the base, which is the back half, mounts to the wall, and then you take the screw out, which is a little stuck. So you unscrew this, and well, instead of the back falling off because the back would be on the wall, the front hinges down. So let me go ahead and open this up and I'll show you what's inside. So here we have the inside of the catalog number 3 NuTone chime base. Although for you, if you've never seen a lot of the insides of NuTone chimes, you might not know exactly what you're looking at, but let's go over it and see. One of the things that makes this chime different than all later chimes is that this is not a motorized chime. This is a Clockwork Mechanism chime. And on this side of the back of the case, this brass assembly, this is a Clockwork Mechanism, and I'll show you what that looks like. And inside here are clockwork gears. There is no motor. And then here we have, in the center, we have a single electromagnetic solenoid, and it has a rod here in the center of it. And over here we have more knurled nut connectors, and this is where the wiring from the transformer and the push buttons would connect up. And we have a movable arm here on the bottom of the solenoid, and over in this area, on this little circuit board area, we have 4 contact points. So the way this works is when someone comes to the door and pushes the doorbell button, it energizes the solenoid, and the solenoid pulls the rod up, so the movable arm goes up like this, and it sort of winds up the clock mechanism. And then when they release the button, the solenoid de-energizes, shuts off, and the weight of the arm and the clockwork mechanism allows the arm to fall very slowly back down. This one hangs up, which is why it's here. And as it slides down, this copper or brass contact wipes across these 4 connections, and that's what energizes the solenoids and makes the tubes ring. And the design of the clockwork mechanism is what regulates the speed of how fast the arm falls, which therefore regulates the speed at which the solenoids fire and therefore ring the tubes. That's the way the mechanism works in the back of the case. And then here in the front of the case we have the pull chain switch here for the light. This is the back of the light socket, and then we have our 4 solenoids here with our plungers and springs. These are all pretty, that one's not too bad, they're pretty gummy and pretty sticky, and that's another reason why it's here. So what I'm going to do is, this is sort of a longer term project because it's going to take more than a couple hours to go through this and restore it back into working condition. One of the things that has to happen is I have to disassemble the clockwork assembly out of the case, and for this part, to make it work reliably, I'm going to take it to my friend Marv. Marv is a clock guy. He restores grandfather clocks and industrial clocks from the late 1800s through the early 1900s, and he's a clock guy. Clock guys are their own breed. They know everything about clocks, and when I get these in and they need to be serviced, what I do is I take the clockwork mechanism out and I take it to Marv. He'll disassemble it and he'll put it in his ultrasonic cleaner and clean all the gears and clean all the parts, and then he'll reassemble it and lubricate it, and it will work just like brand new. So that'll be a few days before I get it to him and then get it back from him. In the meantime, I'm going to work on the rest of this. It's pretty simple, but there are some tricks to this. One of the things that you have to know is that these are the most ultra rare NuTone chimes ever. Anything that was made before World War II, and especially the ones in the late 30s, there's no parts for this. There was no parts for this when I started doing NuTone 35 years ago, and there's no parts for it today. And the odds of finding one of these as a parts unit in the last, I would say in the last 10 or 12 years, I've only found one of these ever for sale. They just don't come along very often, and they just didn't make that many, I have a feeling, and they're really hard to find. So if you have one of these and you feel tempted to fool around with it and think you can make it all better, beware, because if you break something or if you lose something, and the things that people always lose, and I get people that contact me all the time because they see the videos about the chimes. Oh, I was cleaning my solenoids and my plungers and I lost a spring. There's no springs for this. There's no plunger assemblies for this. There's no solenoids for this. There's nothing for this. So if you're going to do it, you better be careful, because if you lose a spring or something, they're very unique springs, you'll never find one, and then I don't know what you're going to do. So proceed at your own risk. So let's go ahead and take a look at the solenoid assemblies, and then we're going to do a little disassembly. So here's a close-up of the solenoid assemblies, and these are really early designs that have the spring on the back end of the striker instead of being in front of the striker. What you have to do to get these out is, in fact, get my magnifier so I can actually see it well enough to do it. There's a groove in the back of the striker right here, and the spring is wound and made in a way that the back end of the spring is smaller than the body of the spring, and it fits into the groove in the striker right here. So what you have to do is you have to very carefully get the spring out of the groove, and you have to do it in a way that you don't bend it, and it's not as easy as it looks. It fits in the groove pretty tightly, and it actually goes around the groove about almost a full turn. So trying to get it out of the groove and up over the end of the rod is tricky because it fits in there pretty well. And the easiest way to do it is to use a really small flat screwdriver and try to get it. It's hard to get it to pull it above the groove, but sometimes you can push it down below the groove onto the long part, and then you keep it out of the way, and you push the striker down. Okay, and it came off. So here's the spring. See if you can see that. See, I dropped it. You have to be really, really careful. So here's the spring right here. So it's sort of a conical shaped spring, which you can see. It's kind of hard with the shadow, but it's smaller here at this end than it is down at that end, and it's got, as it gets ever smaller, it locks into the groove in the plunger or the striker, and you have to be really careful not to bend it, because if you bend it out of shape, it won't stay in place in the groove, and then it pops off when the chime rings. And also, if you stretch the spring out, there we go. If you stretch it out this way, if you pull on it too much, you'll make it too long and you'll never get it back to its original size. So you have to be really, really careful with these. And since this is going to be a longer term project, I'm a little plastic bag here, and all of the springs and other parts are going to go in their own little individual plastic bags, so I don't lose them, and they'll go in the tub with the rest of the stuff, and hopefully we won't lose any. And once you get the spring off, you can push the plunger out through the front. So there's the plunger or striker, and it's just metal. It's a metal rod, steel. It's got a groove down here on the end where the spring locks in. And the other thing about these, which is interesting, is the tips here that strike the tubes, these are made out of wood. And so you have to be really, really careful of them, because if you chew them up or you lose them, it's hard. You have to make new ones. And I actually keep some wooden dowel here just for this. And I don't know if any of these are missing or not, because I haven't taken it all apart yet. But you have to make new ones and then seat them into the plungers and glue them in place so they don't fall out. And it can be a lot of work. So there's one. I'm going to go ahead and disassemble the rest of them, and then we'll start taking apart the mechanism. Alright, so I have my 4 plungers out, and fortunately the tips on the plungers actually look really good. They may appear to be very short, but the way the solenoids are designed, the plungers pop out a fair distance, and that's about as long as they need to be. Of course, they're really dirty and they're kind of sticky, and we're going to clean all of those. So we have our 4 plungers, so we'll put those aside for right now. And I have my 4 springs in their bag so I don't lose them. All I'm going to do when it comes time to clean these is I'm going to put them in a small container with some lighter fluid, and lighter fluid is this, the type you put in a wick lighter, like a Zippo lighter or something like that. It's the kind your dad or granddad would have used. And so it's not barbecue lighter fluid, and it's not paint thinner, and it's not lacquer thinner, it's not any of those things. Lighter fluid is the recommended cleaning fluid for this kind of stuff. And all I'm going to do is I'll soak the springs in the lighter fluid for a while, and then just sort of use some paper towel to dry them off, let it evaporate, and that's all that I'm going to do with these. Again, you don't want to stretch or deform these, because if you do, then it won't work the way it's supposed to. So now let's go ahead and take apart the mechanism so I can take the Clockworks to Marv. Alright, so most of the mechanism is held in place. There are 4 of these acorn nuts. There's 2 here, and there's 2 on this side of the Clockwork mechanism. And the easiest way to take those off is you use a nut driver. These are 5/16. So we're going to take these 2 off on this side first. They're down in here. So all you have to do is unscrew them. And they do screw onto, there's threaded screws with heads, slotted heads on the back of the case. but usually they just come off. You know, who knows, this could be the first time this has been taken apart since the day it was made. And then we'll do these. These are always kind of an adventure to work on because there are no manuals or instructions or anything about these because they're so old. And unfortunately, there's nobody left around anymore to ask whoever was around when these were new. So it's all just sort of make it up as you go work. Let's see. It still seems to be held in place. So there are the remnants of some rubber grommets on the screws also, and sometimes they get really hard and they sort of lock everything together. These are very deformed. Let's see if I can show you that. So these grommets right here, they're really hard. They're very like they've turned into tar. So there's one of my acorn nuts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully sort of pry the clockwork up off the threads. And this side, it's a little hard to see. You have to be really careful of this. This is in fact, see, this piece right here is loose. This is supposed to be glued. You can see the shiny remnants of glue. This fits over the 4 contact points like this. And obviously the glue has dried out, so that'll have to go back in place. And this is some sort of like phenolic resin circuit board kind of material. I don't know whether it's fiberglass or not, like a modern circuit board. I know it's a phenolic resin because that's what they had in the 30s. And you have to be careful because you don't want to break it. So if you carefully pry it away, the whole thing comes out. What I found interesting, I saw this when I was looking at it, here's a little piece of wood that someone put in. It was sitting sort of above the solenoid assembly or something, so somebody was trying to sort of wedge something in there. We'll hold on to that for now for posterity. Here's the rod that activates the switch up here, so we'll put that aside for now. And what we really need to do is we need to disassemble the switch mechanism, which is this part, from the clockwork mechanism. And it seems the way to do that are there's 2 screws with nuts here, so we need to take those out. And like all things NuTone, they use the same size. That makes it a little easier. So we'll put those in there. Of course, there are locking washers because this is very old school. And now we can unhook the solenoid rod out of the lever somehow. There we go. And our clockwork mechanism is free. And our switch assembly and solenoid are here. So we can actually take the rod out of the solenoid now. It just slides out. And the solenoid here, this isn't really that different than the solenoids that fire the plungers that hit the tubes. It's just there for a different purpose. So it has its own steel rod, and this needs to be cleaned up also because it's kind of dirty and it has some oxidation or corrosion on the outside of it, so that'll go there. This part here, we're not going to mess around with too much. In fact, this one screw here is kind of loose, so we'll tighten that up so things don't go wrong accidentally. All I'm going to do with this is I'm going to clean. So this is the little switch assembly. So I'll clean the points in that switch a little bit. I'll clean these contact points up here. These are made out of copper, and make sure all the soldering is good and everything. One of the things on this is you want to do actually as little as possible. You want to make it function correctly, but you don't want to do too much because sometimes the unintended results are you cause other problems. So it's best not to go overboard on this kind of stuff. I will replace all of the grommets and take the charred remnants of the grommets off all the screws. But for now, I'm just going to slip this back in place because I'm going to put one acorn nut back on, because I think the safest place for this to be at the moment is back where it belongs inside the case. It seems to have survived pretty well there all these years, so let's go ahead and put it back. So let's take a look at the Clockwork Mechanism, and then I'll show you a couple things on the front. Here we have sort of an end view of the Clockwork Mechanism, and you can see the gears inside of it. And the way this works is, down here in the bottom is, right here is a spring. And so when the solenoid pulls the arm up, you can hear it wind up, and it stretches the spring a little bit. And then the tension of the spring and the weight of the arm allows it to fall at a particular rate, and as it falls, the contact on the end of the arm touches the contact points and fires the solenoids off, and the tubes ring. So there's actually, I know Marv explained this to me once, but I'll probably get it all wrong. This is sort of a, I think this part, which looks sort of like a flywheel, but it really isn't. I think it's the escapement. It sort of jiggles back and forth and regulates the speed at which all the gears turn. Here we have this little gear here. It's a lot of gears. It's a clock thing. I'm not going to pretend like I understand how it all works, but I'm sure when I pick it up from him after he's done with it, I'll get another lesson on it, and then maybe I can explain it to you better. But these are actually pretty cool. It would be interesting to know if this was a unique NuTone engineered design, or whether this part of this mechanism was something that was sort of an off-the-shelf kind of item that you could purchase from a manufacturer and then they incorporated it into their chime. I don't really know that. It would be interesting if someone else knew. So that's what that's about. So this is going to go to Marv, and he'll get it all cleaned up for me, and then we'll put it back together. So let's look at the front of the chime, and then we'll be pretty close to done for this session. One of the things I like to do on these chimes is do something with the tube hangers, because one, a lot of these were all bent to some degree when I got this. They get kind of nasty looking. There's a lot of corrosion on some of the screws, and there's some rust on the threads. So what I usually do with these is I take the little knurled nuts off, and we'll put those aside. These knurled nuts are interesting because when I was a kid growing up, I had Lionel trains, and these are exactly the same kind of knurled nuts that they used on anything where you connected a wire, like on the transformer for the train set, where you would wrap wires on the binding post. These are the type of screws that they had to tighten the wires down. So this must have been a fairly common type of part that was used in a lot of different products at the time, and I suppose because they have this nice little concave curved area in here, it's a really nice place to hang a string with a tube on it, so that seems to work out pretty well. Once you take the knurled nuts off, all you have left really are threaded screws and nuts, and if you loosen the nuts, and I think, yeah, see, 5/16, you can always count on NuTone. If you loosen the nuts, you can then, you have to reach inside and reach inside and hold the head of the screw, and then you can take the nut off. And of course, because it's old school, there's a locking star washer here. And then you can take the screw out through the back, and of course, because it's old school, there's another locking star washer under the head of the screw. So for right now, I'm just going to put those back together so I don't lose any of them. And what I like to do with these is I'll put these in a little tray and I'll soak them in some navel jelly for a little while. It only takes 10 or 15 minutes usually, and then I'll go over them with a small brass bristle brush. Try to say that 10 times fast, and it'll clean up, it'll take all the oxidation and the rust off of it, and it will clean them up, and they'll look much nicer than they do today. So I'm going to do all 4 of those. I have to replace the grommet here, what's left of the grommet that isolates or insulates the outside threads of the tube socket from the metal case, and I'll have to see what kind of grommet I have that will fit that. This is pretty much turned into some kind of Jurassic tar here, so that's pretty bad. We'll clean up the brass part of the volume control here. The customer doesn't want the case restored or anything like that, which is fine because that's not really what we do here. This is a functional restoration. It's what I call practical chime repair. So we'll do that. I'll make sure the switch works properly. I have to try to figure out what kind of light bulb goes in here because I really don't know. The size of the bulb won't be too hard to figure out, and I'm guessing that since this is a 20-volt chime, it would make sense to use probably a 24 or 28 volt bulb, because by putting a higher voltage bulb in here, it will greatly lengthen the life of the bulb. If you use a 20 volt bulb in a 20 volt circuit, the life of the bulb, a miniature bulb like this, usually is somewhere around maybe 400 to 800 hours, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually not. It actually goes by pretty fast. If you put a 24 or 26 or 28 volt bulb in here, it will increase the life of the bulb by 5 or 10 times. So you could be looking at a bulb that will last 8,000 hours, which is a pretty long time. And so we'll play around with that. Part of the decision on that will be the voltage of the bulb, but it will also be the brightness that I can find for it, because the cover that goes over this is sort of translucent, and you want it to glow nicely at night. You don't want, it's not a beacon or a spotlight, it's just a nice accent light. So we have to choose that carefully. That's pretty much all there is today. Oh wait, I want to show you how I'm going to clean the strikers and that sort of stuff, because I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do that all on camera, but okay. So here's one of our plungers, and you can see it's kind of discolored down at this end and on the very end of it. And it's not as bad up here, but certainly not great. Now, one of the considerations on this is these have wooden tips. And the wooden tips, if you look at it carefully, you can see this is the end grain of the wood. So it's going to be very absorbent. And we don't want to get it soaked up full of all kinds of liquids that might deteriorate the wood, because it is really old, and making new tips is a total pain in the neck. So what we're going to do is, and I wear gloves when I do this because I don't like to get lighter fluid on my hands because it smells, is we'll take a little lighter fluid and we'll just put it on the body of it first, and then we'll use an old toothbrush and we'll just clean it a little bit. This is one of those, what I call, oops, you can't see that, you clean it a little bit with the toothbrush and you try to get it in the groove, and you can put a little more. The lighter fluid evaporates pretty quickly, and mostly what we're doing is we're getting off the substances on it that will dissolve. And you can do the end a little bit, and you don't, again, you want to put just a little. You don't want to get it on the wood and make a big mess out of it. Okay, so that's a good start. It's probably 25% better than it was. So then we'll take a rag and we'll put a little lighter fluid on the rag. And yes, lighter fluid is flammable and all that, so you want good ventilation and no open flames, and proceed at your own risk and all that sort of stuff. And if you just work at it for a little bit, they'll be much better. Now, it's already 50% better than it was, but I want it to be better than this. I don't want any kind of surface oxidation or anything on it like that. So this is how I like to do this, because when these drop into the solenoid tubes, they need to slide perfectly freely. They need to not hang up at all because the solenoids are strong enough to strike the tubes, but they're not super strong, so you have to have it work properly. So the way I like to do this is I use my cordless drill, and you very carefully put one end in the chuck like that so it spins. And then I have this is some 2000 grit wet dry sandpaper. And I'm not going to put anything on it. All I'm going to do is hold it underneath the plunger, and I'm going to run the drill. And that's all. That's as long as it takes. It's now shiny, clean. It's polished, and there's no surface oxidation whatsoever. And of course, we want to do the whole thing. So now we're going to turn it over, put the end we just did in the chuck, and we're going to do the other end. And we'll hold it against the end of it. And that cleaned that up. We take it out, and now if you make a comparison, take it off the rag, you can easily see the difference. So that took me with the explanation and doing the video, it probably took me 3 or 4 minutes to do, if that. And you can see the striking difference between the original one on the left and the cleaned up one on the right. And that's really all you have to do. That's a very effective way to do it. The trick here is you need to use the right sandpaper. You cannot do this if all you've got in your garage is some 100 grit or 200 grit sandpaper. It's not going to do it. All you're going to do is scratch the heck out of the surface of the rod, and it's going to mess up how it works, and it's not the right way to do it. Really, all you want to do is very lightly clean off the surface contamination and lightly polish the metal so it looks like when it was brand new. And 2000 grit sandpaper is the way to do that. So don't be one of these guys that thinks you know more than everybody else and then you foul it up, because I can guarantee you're never going to find one of these. I think that's all for this session. I'll be back after I get the Clockwork Mechanism back from Marv, and I'll show you how to clean the solenoid bores, and then we'll reassemble it all, hear how it works. So I'll be back again. Part 2 of this video probably will be in a week or 10 days. See you later. Hi, so we're at this is my friend Marv.
Hey!
Marv's a clock guy. He knows all about clocks, and he builds clocks and does all kinds of interesting clock things. And we're in his shop, and what we're going to do is, or what he's going to do mostly, because I'm going to make him do most of the work, is this is the Clockwork Mechanism out of the NuTone Chime. And Marv is going to show me how to take it apart, and we're going to clean it all. And then he's going to show me how he can actually put it all back together. Because the very first, he did one of these for me 3 years ago, and he told me he was going to take it apart, clean it, and put it back together. And I said, well, are you sure you know how to do that? And he said, well, it only goes together one way. So he's going to show me how to do all of this, so the next time I don't have to bug him, and maybe I can do it myself. So that's what we're going to do.
Well, this is a sweet little business movement. I call this a tumbler escapement. It's similar to escapement in those thermo clocks with the temperature regulators. It just tumbles around, and actually it's pretty accurate for not having a pendulum or a recoil spring. At any rate, lanterne gears, or lantern. The pivots on this clock are in fine condition. There's no corrosion. There's no corrosion around the pivots.
Okay.
Everything seems to be straight. All it needs is a good cleaning. And that's all we're going to do.
Cool.
Alright. So first off, I think we have to spring the fork off of this drop affair, which is the trigger for the contacts.
Right.
Chris, does electric run across this contact, or does it run a carbon?
It's electric.
No, I mean, but does this drive off a carbon? The spring is gone.
Okay.
There's that piece.
All right. It is the whole assembly. There's a wire that attaches to it when it gets screwed into the base, and so the whole thing has power running through it. And as it falls, it touches the contacts and makes the solenoids fire to strike the chimes.
And you wouldn't want your Westminster going off too fast.
Too fast. And also,
there's a washer there. Let's make a note of that.
Okay. It's actually, it's not actually a Westminster. That's one of the things about these early chimes. It's a 4-tube chime, but it's only 4 notes. It's not an 8-note chime. Because NuTone chime, Westminster chimes are always 8 notes. And so this has just got 4 contacts, so it's a 4-note long tube chime. And that's a common misconception with people that look for these, is they think it's going to be a Westminster chime, but it's not. It's just a 4-note chime. And I'm not sure whether it's 4 notes of the first 4 notes of the Westminster or not. We'll find out when I get it all put back together. But it's just a 4-note chime.
Okay, so we're going to take it apart.
All right. So that looks like a 1/4 inch.
Oh, yes it is.
Yes it is. So I know my nut drivers.
Another thing I noticed 3 years ago, these were completely built for rapid assembly. Whether by a clock manufacturer or NuTone themselves, but the way these threads are tapered at the top, it suggests to me that these things were built to be put together pretty quick.
Okay.
Can you zero in on the taper of that thread?
Yeah. Oh, I see. So it is really smaller at the end of the thread. That makes putting the nut on easier.
Yeah.
Okay.
So okay.
So does it really only go together one way?
Yes. So we can fumble around with it forever, but to get it to run, it's going to be these 4 pivots.
Okay.
Will be. Yeah.
Okay.
Will be in. So here's the escapement wheel. Sweet, with the lantern.
Okay, and it's called that because that's what it looks like.
I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
They were popular on inexpensive clocks, but here is the escapement, which I call a tumbler. And I don't know what the exact name for it is, but I'm going to have you, Chris, polish these 2 pins.
Okay.
We're going to make this into a racing clock. And,
cool.
And here is the here's the ratchet wheel.
Okay.
For the driver, it runs on this piece here, this spring piece.
Okay.
And of course, first gear, first wheel. Second wheel, reduction. Third wheel's the escapement.
Okay.
Did I miss any?
No. I guess when you get it apart, it's not as intimidating. Well, I guess if you know what you're doing.
Now on the inside, again, I didn't feel the end play felt good, and on the inside here, you can see there's no green from oil degradation or corrosion around the pivot. The bearing points.
Okay.
So it's in good shape. I'll go get the basket. We'll drop it in the ammonia clock cleaner and shake it for a while.
Okay. Cool.
Good.
So we'll be back.
Thank you.
Okay, so Marv's going to put the parts in the basket, and the basket goes into ultrasonic cleaner, which is outside, because it's got chemicals and ammonia and stuff in it, and we don't really want to breathe all that, I think. And he's got this little copper basket for the little parts so they don't get lost. Because as I've told all of you before watching this, there's no replacement parts for these. This is all there is. So you have to be careful with it. Otherwise, if you lose it or break it, you'll never find parts to fix it.
Ever again.
Ever again. Okay. So they're all going in the basket, okay. So let's go ahead and... So there's all the parts in the basket. And Marv said we have to get a close-up of them here because we're going to see what they look like when they come out.
There's the one with the fingerprints all over it. There, that one. Yeah.
That one's...
corrosion.
A lot of corrosion on that one. So, alright, so let's take them out to the ultrasonic cleaner and show everybody what that... So we're outside of Marv's shop now, and that's his ultrasonic cleaner with his proprietary chemical mixture to clean brass and other kinds of clock parts. And, oh, that's a lovely noise. That's that ASMR noise that we all hear about all the time. So how long do you think they're going to stay in there?
I don't know. 10 minutes?
10 minutes? Okay. So we'll be back when it's time to take them out.
Done with that.
Alright, so about 10 or 15 minutes has passed and it's time to take the parts out of the cleaner. And let's see if Marv's secret solution did the job.
I'm hoping that'll brush off that corrosion.
Okay. Well, they do look a lot better.
Yeah. Let's see if they'll brush up with soap.
Okay.
The gears look beautiful.
Cool. All right, let's take them inside. Okay, so we're cleaning now. So Marv put the parts out of the basket in just some hot water. And like all good people with shops, he's using his very best used toothbrush to clean them with.
This still got some life in it. But the wheels came out beautiful.
Oh, they're all shiny.
Yeah. Ooh, hot. Look at that.
Oh, that's nice. I can smell the ammonia.
Oh, man. See the lantern movements cleaned up pretty nice?
Uh-huh.
That's okay. I'll knock that crud out of there.
Well, I imagine after 70 years or so, you get a lot of buildup so the buildup probably just sort of overall affects how the whole thing works.
Just gums it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. The escapement wheel. You cleaned up pretty nice. Those pins were showing a little crud. They're looking a lot better. Now, what do you call this piece?
I have no idea.
Oh, okay. It's the one that...
That's the one the solenoid is attached to, and then when you push the button, it energizes the solenoid and it pulls it up. And it's a clever design because there's a Bakelite rod that when it pulls it up, it hits, as it begins to pull up before the contact on the arm touches the first fixed contact on the plate, it pushes the Bakelite rod up first, and the top of the rod pushes on a contact that breaks the circuit, so as the contact wipes up across the 4 button connectors, the tubes don't fire because there's no continuity. And then as it falls, the Bakelite rod falls down, the contact closes, and as the wiper hits across the 4 button contacts, then the solenoids go off. So it's a clever design.
Thank you. Want to hold it for a minute? I'm going to see if I can find some.
So now what Marv is doing is he's got a Scotch-Brite pad, and he's just going over. So
that corrosion bothered me.
Okay.
The fingerprints and the
so is there
acid.
Is there a name for those parts? Or are they just like
plates?
The plates. Okay.
These are the plates.
The plates.
Yes.
So Marv is very meticulous, and he didn't like the way the plates looked. So we're going to clean them up here. Or I should say he's cleaning them up here. I'm just standing here watching, which is a pretty good deal for me.
There's a corrosion deal. Plates are rarely polished, and if they are, they're lacquered. So they have a slight burnish to them, which these will have now. They didn't maybe 70 years ago. Well, I like that look a lot better than those fingerprints.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I point out to people when I talk to them, whether it's something like this door chime, or sometimes it's an old intercom system that was put in their house in, like 1961. I've never seen one new. I don't know what they were like when they were brand new. And something like this, you never would find a brand new one nowadays, and there isn't anybody left to ask about these. Well, not anybody that was there when they made them. So and that's where
here's the old grommet. You have new grommets.
I have new grommets that actually fit.
All right.
Yeah, which is no small feat in the world of trying to find a grommet. Because am I right when I tell people in the videos that the world of grommets is vast, and no matter how hard you look, you'll never find one that's exactly right?
Yes, but they are rubber.
They are rubber. Yeah, there's a certain amount of forgiveness on the whole thing.
The posts are beautiful.
Cool.
The plates are okay. That little bit of corrosion on the plates. The plates weren't lacquered, or we'd have a rigged gumball on our hands if they were originally lacquered.
Okay.
And that's not the case.
That was probably reserved for more fancy things.
Sure.
Yeah.
It was just plate stock initially. This is going to be nice. If we can figure out how it goes back together. Okay.
If we can figure out how it goes back together? That's all on you. And the viewers are expecting that you're going to be able to actually do that. So, no pressure though. Okay.
Okay. Here's all the pieces.
All right.
Okay, this is going to take a minute if you want to save some film.
All right.
Oh. We're not using film.
No, we're not using film. We're digital.
Okay.
So now we're going to dry the parts. Marv has inspected all the parts, and he gave me a brief lesson in sort of the anatomy of each part. It's unfortunate, but everything is so small that it's really hard to show on the camera. So just as
it all looks good.
Okay, so as a review, this one is the
ratchet.
And this one is the Escape, and this one is
second gear,
and this is the Escapement
Wheel.
Yeah. Wheel. Okay.
Well, no, this is the Escapement Wheel. This is the Escapement.
Okay.
Pin style.
Okay.
Or a tumbler.
All right. And according to Marv, these are very well made, like you would find in a moderately priced clock.
Absolutely.
Okay. This is not cheesy Walmart stuff.
No.
No, this is like the real deal. So I would imagine, based on the way things were done at NuTone in those days, when Mr. Corbett ran the company, these were probably made by some company in Ohio, and it could very well have been some company in Cincinnati for them, or maybe somewhere else and they shipped them in. But it's nice to see that they were of good quality. So right now, Marv's got his heat gun, and we're just drying things off.
Seth Thomas did a lot of contract work. I've seen.
Oh, that's true.
But you know, and you don't see any marks or signatures on any of the stuff.
Right. Well, the best guess that anyone has is they only actually made chimes like this for about 2 or maybe 3 years. And then they went to the motor-driven chimes because one of the complaints with these were that when they run, they're kind of noisy. And I think that maybe that was a problem, or maybe it was too expensive to make them this way. There was a better way. And also the motorized chimes are 8-note chimes. And maybe that was something to keep up with the competition.
Going to Techron clocks or perhaps their own.
Yeah.
All these pieces cleaned up really nice, Chris.
Cool.
Now,
all right.
Tough part.
Now the tough part. Now we're going to see if he can actually put it back together. So let's get set up here.
Did you make a note of this? I'm thinking.
Okay.
This central gear goes in first, like right there.
Okay.
And then the ratchet wheel. Is that it? It's also shiny. Right like that. No, that's not it.
No?
No, I have to think again.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
I think Marv's playing with us.
Okay, let's start from the other way.
Okay.
All right. Escapement. That looks good. Okay. And there's the first gear. That's fitting pretty good.
Okay.
Now, what about this one? Why does he want to be so tough? That's a big gear, too. Alright, right there. Is that all? That's not right. What is going on, Chris?
I don't know. That's why you're here.
Oh. What do you think if I turn this one over? That won't fit. One lantern goes up, one lantern goes down. Okay. Uh-oh, that's looking really good.
Okay.
And then there. What do you think?
Okay. So do the gears go round and round? Yeah, they look like they would.
Everything seems to line up.
Okay.
So here we go.
Okay.
This part takes a lot of fingers, sometimes a bunch of hooks. And one. Let me get a hook.
Okay. So what do we have there, like a dental hook kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Where's that little bugger? I have very light pressure on it, but I don't want to lose the 3 that I already have. 4.
Aha.
There they are.
It just all snaps into place. Oh, it goes around.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. See,
Okay.
he makes it look easy.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
It's really nice. It's such a sweet little movement.
Yeah, it really cleaned up really well. It looks like it's brand new.
Okay. I don't want to go crazy. I'm going to check the end play
Okay.
right after I get these things kind of not too tight. End play, got a good end play on the escapement wheel, first wheel, and the ratchet wheel for the driver. Oh yeah.
Okay.
So is that good? I don't know if
Yeah,
you can
I
see
can
that,
see,
but
yeah.
there's probably about 20,000s.
Oh yeah, we can see that.
Yeah.
So
and
it's,
then
it's right.
those 2 bushings or sleeves you were asking about.
Right.
And then there's play here
Uh-huh.
on the second wheel, and then the escapement wheel and the escapement. Good play all the
Okay.
way around.
Cool.
All right. Any missing parts?
The spring and the arm.
Oh, okay. And they will go on the end of the ratchet wheel. Those 2 little washers.
Okay. Oh, I see. So this isn't going to be one of those projects where we have 3 parts left over.
I don't see any yet. Okay, so I'm just going to sproing this.
Is that a technical term, sproing?
Yeah, it's the past participle of spring. Okay, come on, baby.
Ah.
1.
And that, you know what we call that when we do videos? That
What?
noise? That's the click of success.
Ooh.
I have a lot of videos where I show people how to assemble or disassemble, and the click of success is important.
When it comes together.
That's right.
Come on. There we go. We're on our way to your click. All right, that didn't spring too much. That must be... Okay. What's going on, Chris? Aha! That was not this click of success.
Oh, it was not. Uh-oh.
No.
Oh, okay.
This thing has a drop point on the plate.
Oh, I see. That would be this little part right here.
Yes, and I was below that.
Okay. So that prevents it from dropping too far as it falls back down and rings the chime.
I don't want to overstretch this. I'm being very careful. Here's the gut. 1 and 2.
Cool.
Okay, there.
All right.
Now the spring. Only wise guy, eh? Okay.
Ah, see, this is when having the dental hook. I have to get one of those.
Oh.
Well, it's good to see that I'm not the only one that has a hard time with like putting springs back on.
Well, yeah. Boink.
Boink. Hey, at least it didn't fly off the workbench and land in Cleveland somewhere.
There it is, ladies and gentlemen.
Sounds nice.
The escapement pins are just working fine. Everything is groovy. Now, a little bit of clockwork. Excuse me, Chris. See if I can find the stuff. And it's ready for another 70 years.
Oh, cool.
Not too much.
Is that a guarantee? Can I tell the
Yes.
owner
Oh,
of
yeah.
that?
This is such a beautiful thing. As long as nobody comes to their door. Boink. 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 This I'll get from the inside.
Okay.
Boink. There's no oil cups here.
Oh, do clocks usually have things like oil cups?
They have a little divot in the plate.
Uh-huh.
Which would hold the oil.
Oh, okay. So how often do you
boink, boink.
would you normally oil a clock?
Not very often in 2017 because there's no coal being burned to dry them up, and the oil is not whale oil. It's all synthetic. Sorry to say, the oil is synthetic, and it's not whale oil, and I don't know. I think every 5 years I look at the grandfather clocks.
Cool.
And they're fine.
They're
in
fine.
good shape.
Yeah.
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 This is very nice. I'd have to say it was in really good shape to start with, and now it's in really good shape and clean.
It looks really, really nice. So do you think when it operates, do you think compared to before we started, it's better than it was?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you're right.
Before, it seemed like it
was
would
just gummy.
Yeah, it was gummy. It would sort of hesitate and didn't work real freely. And now it seems
very nice.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. So that's how you disassemble and clean and reassemble and service the clock mechanism out of a NuTone Series 2 chime, or Series 1 chime actually. I appreciate Marv mentoring me on this because the next time I get one, I'm going to be able to do it myself. But what that really means is now I have to go buy an ultrasonic cleaner. Oh no. I feel
You're always welcome to use this one, Chris.
No, I don't want to bother you. I have to break down and buy one for myself. What am I going to do?
Had the pivots needed polishing, this is genuine, pilfered from the beauty salon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. All right. So now that Marv's done all the free work for me and everything, he's going to show us real quick a clock that he's building
from other clocks.
From other clocks.
Yes.
And take it away, Marv.
This was an industrial clock. Very heavy plates, huge gears. You can see a bevel gear. This face is only so that the person working on the clock knows what time it is, because it drives out the top, and I'm intending to drive like a 3-foot round tower clock with it. It was an industrial clock to begin with, and I've done a lot of modifications and added some things. It hasn't been to the cleaner yet, as you can see, and running 11 pounds of pendulum.
So is that one of your specially designed mercury filled pendulums?
No, that's lead.
No. Okay. No. So the mercury ones are the other ones next to it, right?
Yes. Okay. The other hobby clock is an astronomical clock that I'm working on. Don't get excited. And the pendulum is mercury. The rod is titanium, and it's running 7 pounds of weight on a reduced. 7 pounds of pendulum weight on a double reduced 8 pounds of drive weight.
And there's the inside of that one. These things are truly amazing.
Yeah.
We've
had some successes with these, and I'm still hobbying with more. It's a lot of fun. The base plate is very important to be nice and strong, and then the standoff posts. But these are works in progress.
These are great. And so the big one you're doing there, what are your plans for that?
I'm going to build a tower in the backyard so you can see what time it is from your house.
Cool. Cool. I think that will be great. So if you can have a 3-foot dial, that means the hands are like 20 inches long?
Yes, counterbalance. So, but this clock has so much power, and the gears are so stout that I think it's going to be okay.
And see, you can actually see it's actually running right now. So
it's running a 3-to-1 purchase on a 20-pound weight.
All right. So the wheel that we can see turning there with the little spokes off of it.
The pinwheel.
That's the pinwheel. Okay, that's not the escapement.
Yes, it is.
It is.
It's very much like your clock.
I learned something.
Only with 30 pins instead of 2.
Well, fine. All right, if you're going to be like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we learned something today, didn't we?
Yeah, that's a pinwheel escapement.
Cool. All right. All right. Well, that's really great. And so is there a time frame on your clock tower? Is that going to be like in the next month you're going to have it all finished?
Yeah, 2 to 5 years.
All right. Thank you, Marv. I really appreciate it.
Okay, Chris.
And I'm sure I'll be back with more questions about the next one.
All right.
Take it easy. Hi. So I'm back from Marv's shop. And now what we need to do, so we have our newly cleaned and reassembled gear drive assembly, and what we need to do is we need to reassemble it and put it back into the chime so we can test it and see how it goes. While this was at Marv's, because I had to wait a few days for him to get to it, I have already gone through and I've cleaned all of the solenoid bores and all of the plungers, and that's all been reassembled. You saw me take all that apart in the first part of the video, and I've re-glued this little spacer piece here that had come loose. I just used some 2-part epoxy and epoxied it back in place, and before I glued it back on, I cleaned the 4 copper contacts and put new grommets here. I also I took all the screws and nuts out, and I cleaned all the threads and cleaned them all up. I also cleaned the adjustable hangers for the 4 tubes. So I took the screws and the nuts and washers out and cleaned them all up and put them all back together, so those all spin freely now, and those are in good shape. So we need to get the mechanism back in place. So the first thing we need to do with this to put it back in is we have to put the grommets back in the 2 holes here, the 2 isolation grommets, so that when it operates it doesn't transfer as much noise. And so I have my grommets here, and the best way to do that is to put them in from the back, and it's a little hard to see. And if you get it started, now I've wet these a little bit with a little bit of dish soap and water solution so they will slide in a little more easily, and then I just use a small flat screwdriver, and you sort of have to push them in around and around until the groove pops through. That one's almost there. And these are a fairly tight fit. These are grommets. These are as close as I think I can find to the original size. They seem to fit the holes well. And then sometimes what happens is on the other side they're kind of folded over, so then you take your screwdriver and you sort of pop them loose and give them sort of a push and tug, and there it is in place. So there's one, and then we'll do the second one. And I think I know why NuTone, as time went on, especially when you get towards the middle and late 50s, why there's less grommets in a lot of the chime bases that they made. Because I don't think there was a machine that would have been used to put the grommets in. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think there's really a grommet inserting machine. I think it was probably done by a person when the bases were assembled, and I don't know if there's a better way to do it than this. I'm sure the person that did it probably was an expert at it by the time they had done it 1,000 times. But less grommets mean less labor, which means less cost, and I'm pretty sure that's probably how it went. So now our grommets are in place. We have both of them. And the next step we have to do is we have to reassemble the mechanism to the switchboard here. And the way that goes is this becomes one assembly. So here we have the electromagnetic coil, and it's wired onto the back of the board, and it's held in place. There are 2 screws, and there'll be nuts on the back. So the way this goes is you put the screws in first, if you can. Then the solenoid bracket goes on the back of the circuit board, I'll call it, for the switch assembly. And this is a little tricky to do, because if you had 2 extra hands it would be easier, but maybe it's better just to do the top one first, and then you put the gear drive mechanism in place. This is also a little tricky to do when you've got to try to keep your hands out of the way of the camera, and that's being difficult. So let's try it this way. Sometimes needle nose pliers are your friends, and you just sort of have to get it all in place, and it's just being difficult. I'm also wearing gloves because I'm going to try to keep my fingerprints off the newly cleaned brass gear drive, since we went through all the trouble to make it look nice. So maybe what I'll do with that is I use a little piece of tape. And I'll put a little piece of tape over the head of the screw. And then I'll put the solenoid bracket in if I can. And then hold the head of the screw, put the gear drive assembly back on. And it's still tricky to do. You can push the screw down. Then you have to put the wire. There's a wire with a connector on the end of it, and that has to go through also, because the gear drive assembly, since it's metal, is conductive, and it's actually how the power gets into the contact that swipes against the buttons that activate the solenoids. So I'm not being very successful. I'll tell you what, I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'm back. So I have been able to, I've got the 2 screws through the holes. This is really tricky to do because it's hard to reach in there and get it all lined up and then get the nuts on, and it's a tight fit. So what I did was I put the first screw in, and I was able to get my finger in there and hold it down, and then I got the gear drive assembly on with the wire and the connector, and then I've got the nut started. It's just loose on there, and then I lined it up so the second hole was lined up with the hole in the solenoid bracket, and then tightened down the top nut a little bit to hold it in place, and then fished the screw through and held it and put the nut on. And these both have lock. This one has a lock washer, and this one, the connector on the end of the wire is serrated inside, so it's acting as a lock washer. So I've got this one started, but this is all kind of loose right now, which is the way you want it, because there's 2 more things we have to reassemble. This is the plunger rod that goes through the solenoid, and we have to put this in place. And this is a unique design. I've cleaned this, so I took the corrosion off of it, so it's all shiny now and clean. And on the end here, there's a slot. You can see the slot right here. You see the screwdriver go through it. And then on the end right here, there's like a little bearing that spins. And the way this works is the rod goes up in the solenoid and it hooks over this slot in the arm right here. And when the solenoid is energized, it's what pulls it up. So it has the spinning bearing, so I would imagine, so that it doesn't wear the brass at the top of the slot. So you need to have this kind of loose here like this, so you have enough play to slide this up in the solenoid like this. And then once it's in the solenoid, you can see that it's free, it moves freely. And then what you do is you pull it out of the solenoid, and then you have to hook it over the end of the slot, which is kind of hard to do and show you. But if you leave everything kind of loose, you could hook it over like that. So once you get that in place, then the last thing you have to do is you have to put in this Bakelite rod. It's either Bakelite or some type of plastic. It's not conductive, and I think it's probably, because of its age, is probably Bakelite. And this is an important piece because it's what disables the current, the electricity through the assembly when the arm goes up, when someone would have pushed the button. So this goes, there's a slot here in the bottom of the arm, and the big end of this gets hooked through the slot, and then it goes up through another set of holes in the solenoid bracket. And this is kind of a loose fit, which actually makes it easier to put together. And then once you get that in place, you can turn it over and tighten up the nuts. Now these are 5/16, so a 5/16 nut driver does a pretty good job, although I'll probably have to reach in there with a screwdriver and hold the head of the screw a little bit, which means I need to take the Bakelite rod back out because it's in the way now. This is a fussy thing to do, but all of these kinds of chime projects are somewhat fussy. So if you hold the head of the screw, I imagine that when this was probably assembled originally, they might have put the solenoid in the bracket afterwards, and that would have given you more clearance. But you want it to be tight enough that you don't want it to work loose over the years. You know, it lasted 70 years the first time. I think it should last at least that long the second time. So let's see if we can get these tightened up. Again, as I comment on fairly often, this is tricky to do when you're trying to do it on camera. That's why, to get the screws in, it was easier to shut the camera off. Okay, so that's tight now. So we'll put our Bakelite rod back in, and we're almost ready to set this back in place like that. So just two more things to do. So right here, see if I can let you see this. So right here, this is a switch. So there's a brass plate here with one of the solenoid wire, with a wire that comes through it that goes to the solenoid, and there's another one here, and there's a contact here that opens and closes, and this is what the Bakelite rod pushes up against here. So you might be able to see, if you watch the contacts right here, I'll use the screwdriver acting as the Bakelite switch, and you can see how it opens the contact. So when the solenoid is energized, it pulls the plunger up, which pulls up the contact arm, the pivoting arm, which pulls up the Bakelite rod, which pushes against the brass or copper strap, which opens the switch. And when you open the switch, you shut off the current or the electricity. So I'm going to clean this right now. And the easiest way to clean little contacts like that is you can use like a small contact or a point file, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a piece of 2000 grit sandpaper. This is wet dry, and I've just folded it over, so I've got abrasive on both sides, and then I've cut it narrow so it fits in between the switch halves easily. At least I think it will. And all you have to do is fish it in. If I had an extra hand, it would be easier. Maybe I should make Marv come down and help me, since he's already done a lot of this. Once you get it in between the contacts, all you have to do is apply a little pressure to keep them closed and just go back and forth a few times. Since there isn't any, like that, and that should be fine. Since there isn't any real current that flows through these, when there isn't current flowing through them as they open, so there shouldn't be any arcing on them as they open and close, and because of that the contact should be in pretty good shape. So I think we're okay with that. So let's get ready to put all of this back together. So to reassemble this, the 4 grommets, there's the 2 that we put in the gear drive, and there's the 2 on the switchboard assembly. And what you have to do is you just slip them down over the screws that come through the back, and it sits on the base assembly. And then there are these 4 little, I call them acorn nuts because they kind of look like acorns, and they're chrome. They're kind of nice, and I cleaned them up. The way I clean the screws and the nuts and the acorn caps and all that kind of stuff is because they're pretty oxidized and corroded just from being 70 some years old. So the way I clean those is I disassemble them all, and I put them in a small tray and use some navel jelly and let them soak in the navel jelly for a while, and the navel jelly takes away the corrosion on the surface of everything, and then you just use a small brass bristle brush and brush them some to get off the remaining parts, and then you rinse them off with water and dry them off, and they're good to go. The least you do, the better. So once you get the 4 acorn nuts in place, they are 5/16 also, so you can use your 5/16 nut driver, and you just snug these down. I don't think you really need to wrench on them, since this is really a sort of like a self-contained assembly. You just want to hold it in place. I don't think you need to really wrench on it. And there's our reassembled mechanism. So the way this will work again is when the solenoid is energized, when somebody pushes the doorbell button, it will raise the rod, it'll pull it up, and it wipes up like this. And then when you let go of the button, the gear drive assembly makes it slowly fall down. This is the moving contact. It touches the 4 buttons, and that's what makes the chime ring. Okay, I'm back. So let's go over all the things. You don't realize it, but it's been probably the better part of 45 minutes since the last segment I shot. And all of that time was spent playing around with this to see if we could get it to work properly. So here are some of the things that I had to deal with that I didn't show on camera because it's a fussy thing to work on, and it's just hands in front of everything, and there's nothing you could have seen. It's just too difficult. And you have to remember that this is not what I call a science project. I'm not doing this for me, I'm doing this for a customer, so I do need to get it to work properly. So some of the things I have to do. First, let's review how it works, because perhaps I didn't explain it well previously. When someone comes up to the front door and pushes the button, it completes the circuit, which then energizes the solenoid. When the solenoid is energized, it pulls the metal rod up into the electromagnetic coil, and it does this. It ratchets up like this. When it pulls up, when the solenoid pulls the arm up, it pulls up on the part of the Bakelite rod that's a larger diameter that sits above the slot in the moving arm, and it pulls it up. You can see right here there's a gap between the rest and the bottom of it, and that's how much it pulls it up. When it pulls it up, the portion of the Bakelite rod that's a larger diameter pushes the contact switch open up here, and it breaks the connection. So then as it falls down, the moving contact wipes over the buttons and the solenoids fire. When it reaches the bottom of its travel, the moving arm, and it's different, it's hard to show because it needs to be up like this, like it would be sitting on a wall. The weight of and the movement of the arm pushes down against the bottom of the Bakelite rod and pulls it down. So to make this work properly, when the solenoid pulls the arm up the arm pushes up on the Bakelite rod, and if you watch down here where it's resting on the stop, you can see it pulls up. It has to remain in the up position until the moving arm pulls it back down, so the switch stays open the whole time the moving contact is moving downwards. If it doesn't stay open, what happens is, as the moving contact wipes over the 4 button contacts, the solenoids will fire sometimes once, but sometimes they'll bounce, and you don't want that because you don't want it to hit the tube more than 1 time for each note. So it's important to get the solenoid rod or the Bakelite rod to work correctly, and it's kind of tricky because there's no adjustment for it. It's just inherent in the way it was designed. And I have another one here, and this is from another one that I own. And what happens to these, I think, is if you look at it carefully, and it'd be kind of hard, you won't really be able to see. The bottom here, this is in the orientation that would fit into the chime mechanism. The bottom here is kind of flared out and worn from being pushed on all the time, and it gets pushed pretty hard, and you'll see that because we're going to turn this on in a second. And I think the body of it, the larger diameter piece here, because it's sliding through holes in the solenoid bracket, which is metal, it's either become polished so it's really, really smooth, or it's worn down somewhat, and it's really the friction where when it slides up and it pushes against the copper part of the contact switch, which is at an angle like this. Let's move it over here where you can see it. So the rod's straight, and the switch, the part of the switch it pushes up with, is at an angle. It pushes up, it pushes the switch away, and it's the tension between the copper strip and the body of the Bakelite rod that holds the rod up until the moving arm falls down far enough to pull it back down. That's all really very tricky, and there's no real adjustment for it. It's just kind of the way it is. So it's very tricky, and it's got to work properly, otherwise it doesn't work properly. So I think I've got it so it's pretty close, and yes, I have already tried it, because this is one of those kind of things that you have to adjust it, try it, adjust it, try it, adjust it, and try it. And what you don't know is I've had this whole assembly out of the back of the case probably 6 or 8 times since the last part of this video was shot, because it's hard to see, and you have to play around with it and figure out what you can do with it, and it's complicated. So that was one thing that I solved. The other thing that I had to redo was this shim, this piece of material here, whether it's some kind of fiberglass or plastic, or I'm not sure what it is. It's sort of a circuit boardy kind of material that provides the surface that the moving contact slides over, and it reduces the amount of the button contacts that are exposed. And the reason they have this piece is, if you take this piece out, the button contacts, they're more like little mounds, and so when the moving contact swipes down over them, it's like going over a hill in the car. You go over the hill, top the hill, down the hill, and the amount of time that the moving contact is touching the button contact is too long, and it doesn't ring at the right tempo. So this piece, the thickness of this piece, changes the amount of exposure of the button contacts. This wasn't actually lying flat enough on the board, and these first two weren't protruding enough through the holes in it, and the moving contact wasn't touching them reliably. So what I had to do to get it to line up is this upper grommet up here is probably a slightly larger diameter, outside diameter, than the original one. So all I did was take a X-Acto knife and I cut it off at an angle, and then took this off, re-glued it, made sure it was flat, and now that part is fine. The other thing that sort of stumped me for a little bit, I was having unreliable solenoid activations, which means I couldn't get it to work every time. And what I found was, there's 2 wires that come out of the solenoid. One is here. Let's see if we can make it so you can see this. So there's one wire here, and this has a woven cloth cover on it. It's brown. And there was another one here, and these wires go down through a rivet. They go through the hole of the rivet, and this one is folded over and is soldered onto this point. And this one just goes through the hole of the rivet, and the cloth cover insulates it so it doesn't touch. And here's the old piece, and this is actually so old that where it went through the rivet and it was kind of bent over at a right angle, it had cracked through because this material is so old, and the wire was shorting out on this piece of copper plate right here, this copper strap, which is part of the switch assembly. So we were essentially getting a dead short. And once I figured that out, I desoldered the wire, which goes down here, and then pulled it all back, replaced the covering with some new woven covering that we keep here at the shop just for these kind of occasions, and put it all back together, and that solved that problem. I think that was about it. And that sounds like a lot, and it was. So I've got it hooked up here to my bench. I don't have it on my bench power supply because my bench power supply won't really provide enough wattage to run this thing properly. So I have it set up on a transformer because I need something higher wattage than what the bench power supply is really designed to provide. It says on here that it's rated at 110 to 120 volts AC at 50 watts. I'm pretty sure these chimes are all use 20 watt transformers, and I think that something in the neighborhood of 25 or 30 watt 20 volt transformer would be about right. So for testing purposes while I'm working on it, I'm using a 24 volt 40 watt transformer, which is a little bigger than normal, but for short testing it's a good powerful one, and that works out really well. Oh, some of the other things that had to be done to make this work, and we're going to go back to the Bakelite rod for a second because there's a lot of fine points to doing this, so this is tricky. One of the things that this needs is on the stop down here for the Bakelite rod, there's supposed to be a piece of felt as a cushion, and up here inside the cover where the top of the Bakelite rod, when it slams up from the solenoid, where it would hit the top of the metal cover, there's supposed to be another felt pad. Well, these felt pads, I've got these at the local hardware store, like this. And I bought these because I like the size of them. These are for cabinet doors. And I like the size of them. They're a little bigger than average, and I thought they would fit well. And also they're brown. The original ones I think were probably green, I think, but I couldn't find larger green ones, and I thought the brown went good with the copper case. So I thought that was good. So I put one of those on the stop down here at the bottom, because without the felt, when the moving arm falls down and pulls the Bakelite rod, oops, you can't see that, it pulls the Bakelite rod down. If you don't have the felt stop, the Bakelite rod falls down too far, and the top of it falls out of the hole in the top of the solenoid bracket, and then it doesn't line up correctly anymore. So the felt pad on the bottom is important. The other thing that's important is you're supposed to have a felt pad on the top, so when the arm pushes it up, it's not hitting the metal all the time, because I don't think you want to hear the noise of that, and I also think it might wear the Bakelite rod. So I did the same thing. I took another one and I just put it inside in here in the top, and the problem with that was it was too thick this way. So this is about as thick as maybe a little bit less than a nickel in thickness this way. Not the diameter, but the actual thickness. And it was too thick, and it meant that when the Bakelite rod went up, it wasn't going up quite far enough, so it wasn't reliably pushing the switch open, and that caused problems with how the solenoids operated, where we were getting those double bounces. So what I had to do was take one of these, and a single edge razor blade and hold this on the edge and very carefully saw it in half to make it half as thick. So now it's about the thickness of a dime or so. Here's the other half of it, which I'm going to save because I can put adhesive on it and use it somewhere else. So now it's a lot thinner, it's more like a dime, and that made enough of a difference that when the Bakelite rod goes up, it pushes the switch open reliably. The tension of the switch against the larger diameter of the Bakelite rod holds the rod up, and now it all seems to work okay. So welcome to the horrors of my afternoon. This is a very complicated little thing to work on, and don't underestimate the amount of effort that went into designing all this. Also, if you factor in the idea that I don't think anybody that worked on this when it was new or designed this ever imagined it would be around 70 years later. It's a complicated little beast to work on. Let's go ahead, now that I've talked a lot, let's go ahead and fire it up and show you how it works. Power from the transformer goes in on the top and the bottom. In modern terms, this would be transformer and this would be common. This is front and this is rear. So like any other 4-wire chime, the button, which is going to be our green clip lead for right now, one side of the button goes on common, and the other side of the it would go through the push button switch and it makes closes the connection to the front terminal. So let's go ahead and turn my power on, and you have to watch because it goes fast. Now, one of the things about this is it's really designed to be sitting on a wall vertically. It's not really meant to be laying open at an angle. So when I close it up, you can't see, but it actually works better. But watch how fast the solenoid pulls the moving arm up and the amount of force that it has. It's pretty fast. And the duration of the solenoids being energized is the result of two things. It's the speed at which the moving arm drops, which is regulated by the gear assembly, the clockwork assembly over here that we cleaned at Marv's place, and it's also the amount of surface contact as the moving contact moves over the top of each button contact, which is why you have this shim piece with the holes over the buttons, because without this, the moving contact would be in contact with each button probably twice as long, and that's not really what you want. That's not what NuTone wanted when they designed it. So I assume that it was designed to provide the right mechanical tempo. So let's go ahead and see if we can sort of close it up some, and you can see the solenoids go properly. So that's pretty close. So you have to watch down here. I am going to hang this, but I'm not ready to do that yet. So you can watch them fire. And one of them had a little bit of a double bounce. I think it's because it's not all sitting together correctly. The other thing about something like this is, you know, I've never seen one of these brand new. I don't really know how they operated when they were brand new, how perfectly they operated every time. So we're going for like 99 out of 100 on something like this. This is the volume control. So if you watch how, then the volume control is essentially a rheostat, and you're adjusting the voltage that goes to the solenoids. So if we ring it again, okay, you can kind of judge how much power the solenoids are getting by the amount of sound it makes when it fires the striker out. If we move this down, we're lowering the voltage. So we'll move it down there, and you'll see this time they're not hitting with nearly as much force. So that's how you play with the adjustments. The other thing you do to play with the adjustments is when you hang the tubes on the movable adjustable hangers here, you can thread them further away or closer to the strikers, and that makes a difference in how hard they strike also. So it's sort of a happy medium between the distance that you have the tubes at and the volume here. When you adjust this, the natural tendency on everybody that has any kind of long tube chime is to always have whatever volume adjustment there is set to maximum so they hit as hard as humanly possible. That's not always the best way. You really should think of it a lot more like a musical instrument, and you have to play around with it and get it tuned up correctly so it works the way it's supposed to. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish putting this together and hang it, and let's see if we can get some tubes on it. Oh wait, one more thing. Okay, so power supply goes off because we don't want sparks and smoke at this point, because I think we're almost done. The last thing we have to do, turn this around, has to do with the solenoids. So we have the coils here, all 4 of them. We have the plungers in the middle with the springs, and these of course have all been cleaned. And then we have the stops here. The stops are part of the chassis assembly, and when these were new, they had some kind of probably felt pads, and what's left of them is pretty nasty. If this was felt, which I would guess it was, let's see if we can get one of these out of here. So what we have left now, instead of felt, are something that looks more like little charcoal briquettes out of your barbecue, and that's not going to work very well. One, they're all irregular shaped, and they actually came off pretty easily, which is a bonus for me. But the purpose of them, let's get the rest of that out of there. The purpose of them is so when the solenoids de-energize and the springs pull the plungers back in, they have to hit against the stops, because otherwise they would just fly out of the solenoids, and you don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our little cabinet pads, and we're going to put one on each stop, and that way when the plungers fly back in, they have something soft to hit against, so you don't hear it hit the metal, because you don't really want that. So I'm going to put all 4 of those on, and then we're going to hang this and see what we get. Okay, so I've got the base installed. I've got it hung at the shop. I've got my tubes on it. This is pretty close to the right set of tubes. These 3, which you've seen in other videos, if you watch the other chime videos, these are 3 tubes that I have, and it's for a 3-note Trinity chime base or Series 1 chime base. And then this tube here, this is actually from a K series. It's much later, it's from the 1950s, but it's the right length, and it has a different type of hanger, and I just sort of knotted it to pull it up a little bit so it lines up correctly. And fortunately, the lengths of the tubes are correct, so you can actually hear what it sounds like when it rings. So what you want to listen for is when I push the button here, I have a little lit doorbell button. When I push the button, you'll probably be able to hear the solenoid pull the moving arm up, and then there's a pause, and then it drops, and the chime rings. And yes, the tubes are still resonating. That's how good the tubes are. It rang well, I think. The first one, the number 1 strike, is here on the 4th tube. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear it kind of flutters a little bit. And that's because the solenoid, as the moving arm moves down across the button contact, it's fluttering. The contact between the moving arm and the button is not it's not as solid probably as it should be. It's probably because the whole thing is mechanical and it's falling, it sort of make a fluttering contact. So listen to that again. Listen to this one. See, and that time, it wasn't as bad on the first one, and we might be able to adjust it out a little bit to see if we can lessen it. And that was probably better. So perhaps you make up for it by moving the tubes in and out. So that seems pretty good. So I think it works well. I think it will be fundamentally reliable. One of the things to note is these are a standard set of the first 4 notes for our classic NuTone Westminster chime. Most people think of Westminster chimes as always being 8 notes, but what you have here is you have the first 4 notes of the Westminster chime. It's not an 8-note chime, it's only a 4-note chime because it only runs through the cycle 1 time. Later chimes, and I think that's the reason why later on they abandoned this basic design with the clockwork mechanism and went to the motor-driven assembly, because then you could have 8 notes instead of 4 notes. And I don't know if it necessarily was a quest to get all 8 notes of a Westminster chime. I think it probably had something to do with the fact that there were other companies making long tube door chimes at the same time, and they needed to have designs that were more competitive. So you want to have what everyone else has, so people want to buy yours instead of some other brand. So I think that probably was the driving force behind it. And this type of design with the clockwork mechanism and the button contacts and the moving arm, it wouldn't have been physically big. The case isn't physically big enough to fit 4 more contacts in it. You have to come up with another way to do it that still fits in this same box, because the Series 2 chimes, the ones that came after this, same exact box. In fact, the earliest ones were still this copper color, but in this area here they have the motors on the inside and the clockwork contacts are on the outside, and it has a contact arm that the motor turns the arm and touches the button contacts. The ones that came slightly after that, the cases became ivory colored instead of the copper tone color, and that's how you can date them. But I think it was a practical choice. One of the things about the volume control is if you're going to adjust this, what you have to do is it's this little knob that makes the adjustment. And if you're going to do this, don't just slide it up and down against the coil wires here. What you really want to do is pull it out a little bit and then slide it and then reseat it wherever it is you want it, because you don't want to rake it across the coil wires, and because you could bend them or you might damage them or break them because they're old. So you have to be careful. And again, don't just set this to maximum. That's not necessarily the right place for it. I think we did good. That's the ins and outs of rebuilding a NuTone Series 1 4-note long tube chime. I hope you found this interesting. We should all give a big thanks to Marv for giving up his time and teaching me how to work on the clockwork mechanism. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. If you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, we would appreciate it. We post new. If you subscribe, you'll get notifications, and there'll be a little window here that shows you how to subscribe. If you click on the little bell on the subscribe window, you'll get email notifications when we post new videos. We try to do at least 1 video a week. Thanks for watching. See you on the next video.